All right, today we are going to talk about cholesterol, a super important marker of our metabolic health, also a component of our foods. And so, as a reminder, as we get into this topic, we always want to consider the four bodies as being equally important. And I call the four bodies the physical body, the mental body, emotional body, and spiritual body. These are all interconnected. As a functional medicine practitioner, I look at the entire person and how all of these bodies are connecting. And so, while we are going to be talking a little more about the physical body and things like food, I also want you to understand that all of these are going to influence each other. And hopefully you can consider how they all relate to cholesterol. So when we are wanting to influence any of those four bodies, we want to think about the upstream factors that we can take control over and how they will influence the downstream factors. So the upstream factors being our food and beverage intake, the thoughts that we are putting into our brain, and then also the chemicals and environmental exposures we are surrounded with. And so those sometimes we don't have as much control over, but there are some things we can take out, such as smoking, lots of chemicals in cleaning products, beauty products, some of those things that we could adjust if we wanted to. And then those downstream influences are going to be how the cells in our body are functioning, how our genes are being expressed. So we are given a set of genes, but our habits and things we input into our body can change how these genes are actually expressed in the body, which is known as epigenetics. And then the neurons and nervous system and how that is going to also function. And one more review of a topic, metabolic health is considered these 5 factors: blood pressure, blood sugar, triglycerides, and cholesterol levels, and our circumference of our waist to hip ratio. So what is cholesterol? So on the biochemical side of things, it is a component of every cell in our body. It is especially important for producing hormones. Vitamin D is actually also a hormone for producing sex hormones that influence fertility, they influence body weight, they influence our menstrual cycle, energy levels, libido, they also for our stress hormones like cortisol. Then cholesterol is also a part of the myelin sheath of the nervous system. And it's also important for producing bile salts, which help us to break down and digest our food and get all of the nutrients out of it. So a lot of really important reasons to have cholesterol in our body. We just run into some issues when we have the wrong types and we have too much or not enough. So I want to also review this term called oxidation. So the photo here is not loading, but it's a photo of an apple that's turning brown. So the cellular process of oxidation is losing an electron and gaining oxygen. So what that means in our body is oxidation is going to lead to an increased risk of inflammation and disease. So if you have heard the term antioxidants, these are found in certain foods like fruits and vegetables. These are going to fight oxidation, so they will decrease risk of disease. So, as I said, cholesterol, we need to have some of it. It has a very important function in our body. But when we test it in the blood, we look at this at like our normal physicals. As a functional provider, I look at this. We want to have just the right amount, okay? And so there are going to be some different ranges different providers might use. I always encourage you to ask your provider, okay, what does this really mean in context of my health? Look at the trends you've had over time, okay? Just one number doesn't always give us the whole picture. This is why doing regular blood work is really important. I usually am looking for a range of 150 to 220. However, I also have seen some providers who look at and say like it's actually okay if you're even a little higher than 220. We want to look at other health markers too and other risks for heart conditions because there are actually some cultures that have had much higher levels of cholesterol and still really healthy, long lives. We have actually recently decreased the cholesterol range in conventional medicine. It's normally looking at more like 200 as the high range. So again, there's going to be some other markers I will talk about, but there is risks of having too low of cholesterol as well, which I have seen sometimes related to under eating, not getting enough good fat in our diet, or just being too stressed. So some other markers that I look at as a functional medicine provider. So again, these markers potentially your doctor would look at, but usually they're not going to be covered by insurance because we're going to address them through a more lifestyle and nutrition focused approach, not necessarily a medication. But the small dense LDL, so the size of the LDL matters. These proteins ApoA1 and ApoB are highly associated with cardiovascular disease risk. Plaque, MPO, and CRP are inflammatory markers. Homocysteine has to do with micronutrients and potentially genetics, and then oxidized LDL. So I am going to go a little more into what all of these mean. So ApoB and ApoA1, like I said, those are protein components of cholesterol. And some things that we know are associated with having these markers be more in the risk range. Smoking. Sorry, I had to take a drink there. Smoking, not getting a lot of physical activity, having higher BMI, high sugar intake, and low intake of fermented dairy foods like yogurt and kefir. So again, these are all very like habit, lifestyle-based things. There's not necessarily one supplement or medication that's going to lower these risk factors. It's a very holistic thing. MPO is a marker that comes from our white blood cells and is associated with chronic levels of high inflammation. And again, inflammation is a very broad term. It can be related to diet. Yes, there are foods that can be more pro-inflammatory, more antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, but also every thought that we think in our head can produce an inflammatory reaction in the body. Things that we were exposed to as children, different chemicals, exposures, even just genetically, how we are the risks of other people in our family, autoimmune conditions, all these things can influence inflammation and impact our heart. I love this photo here showing the large fluffy LDL compared to the small dense LDL. So we know that the size of our particles do matter. And unfortunately, this research is still making its way to the conventional medicine community. So it's not really a test that they're going to do on the physical. So just keep that in mind that if you do have high levels of LDL, but you're eating a really balanced diet and you're not smoking, you're exercising, you're consuming moderate amounts of alcohol, you might not have much risk. Okay. If you have things to work on, that's just some information for you to take and to know, okay, I should look at the trends over time and potentially even find a provider who, like myself, will order some of these other tests so that you can be informed. I always think that knowledge and information about our bodies is power, okay? Why didn't I want to go forward? Okay, so let's actually get into some of the things we can do to improve our cholesterol levels and optimize cholesterol, even if you don't yet have any markers out of range. Still including all of these 5 habits. So first one is having plenty of fiber in our diet. This is one I talk about for pretty much everybody because it's going to support our gut health. It's going to help our appetite stay regular. It's going to keep our blood sugar stable. And it's also going to help lower cholesterol because fibers help to bind to cholesterol so we can excrete them out of our bodies through our digestive processes. B vitamins also really important. So B vitamins can be depleted through stress or potentially we just aren't consuming enough of them. B vitamins are a water-soluble vitamin, meaning we can only absorb and use so much at once. So that is why it can be important to add in a supplement. Maybe you are not getting enough protein some meals, or you have a genetic effect that you are not using them as efficiently. The MTHFR gene is a common one that about 40% of the population have. So you can test for that to see if you need more of folate in your supplement. But consuming whole grains and meats and beans is a great way to get plenty of B vitamins. And taking a good quality multivitamin is also something I recommend for most of my clients. The next one is adding in more omega-3s and less omega-6s. So the main source of omega-6 that I start with trying to limit is vegetable oils. So there are omega-6 fats in animal products like meats and dairy. However, those also contain a lot of other really great nutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, all those things. So we don't need to take those out. Typically, I'm not ever decreasing those in most people's diet. It's more adding things in. So adding those omega-3s, I have a list here, as well as you can find in different, some of my free guides, my recipe books, just ways to get those omega-3 fats in, and recipes that include the avocado and olive oil, which they don't have the omega-3 fats, but they also don't have much omega-6. So they're kind of a neutral, I would call them. But yeah, there's been a lot more research coming out in the past 5 to 10 years on the omega-3, omega-6 ratio. And so that, again, that's one that conventional medicine, they might mention omega-3 supplements being helpful, but they may not discuss how to limit those omega-6s, because those two types of fats we need both of them, but we need the right ratio. We want to have more of like a 3-to-1 ratio. That's pretty low. Most people have more like a 30-to-1 ratio. I've seen some really, really, really imbalanced ones. And so it's not just about adding more omega-3s, but we can take out some of those omega-6s. And exercise, of course, we know that is going to help decrease risks of so many health conditions. The reason I would say for cholesterol, it really does help raise that HDL level, which the ratio of HDL to LDL is important. And so we know exercising helps with that, but also by building muscle mass, we're going to better regulate our blood sugar and our inflammation levels. We're also just going to be able to consume a little more calories and still be in that calorie deficit. So exercise is super important. Also, it will help us to manage our stress levels, which stress can drive up cholesterol too. So last one is limiting sugar. And this, again, really comes back down to the inflammation piece. It's not typically that we are consuming too much cholesterol in our foods, but we are consuming too many carbs and have too much inflammation. That is going to impact our heart health more than cholesterol levels. So that is where the high sensitivity CRP marker comes in, which can be related to nutrition, stress, gut health, and potentially underlying infections. So is cholesterol in food bad? Should we be limiting red meat and eggs? This is probably still something that some providers are saying. I know I've had plenty of clients who've said that. I've heard it from my own provider. And I based on my functional medicine training and my own personal experience as well, which my body is not your body, I do not think that we need to be really limiting beef and eggs. There are people I know who don't digest these foods as well because they have more fat in them. So that might be a reason too. But because of cholesterol levels, no, I do not think we need to. There are some really great micronutrients in these foods, like the B vitamins, zinc, iron, but still everything in moderation. When I say limiting these, I mean like completely taking them out. Having beef a couple times a week, having eggs 3 to 4 times a week. Some people do well with having them eat every day, is to me just fine. We more want to focus on what are we having with these foods, right? So are we having a bunch of processed refined omega-6 fats from fried foods? Are we having high sugar drinks? Are we not getting fiber with them? That to me is where we want to start. Looking at genetics, some people will be a little bit more sensitive to cholesterol in food. And so that's why looking at our trends over time, if you did significantly increase your animal-based foods, start eating a keto, more carnivore type diet and taking out fruits, vegetables, and your cholesterol skyrockets, then yes, you maybe did overdo it. But if we are staying pretty stable, we're focusing on building muscle, all of these things, I don't think that your cholesterol will be a major concern. You're probably going to see decreased levels of inflammation. And again, remembering that the fermented dairy intake was associated with less risk of heart health concerns. So there are different benefits to different types of dairy. Fermented, like full fat yogurt and kefir are two that I think have great benefits. They really decrease inflammation. They impact the gut compared to like a more processed type of cheese, like found in maybe frozen pizzas and mac and cheese. Okay, there's differences. There's a lot of really great nutrients in some hard cheeses too. So there is more to it than just take out cholesterol and saturated fats. And so I didn't say this, but cholesterol in food is found typically in animal-based products like meats, beef, milk and dairy, also in coconut oil, but coconut oil is the only plant-based one. Okay, so hopefully you are making some connections, right, about how our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual bodies are all connected. So like I had said, our heart health will be influenced by the foods we are eating because we have some foods that contain more of those antioxidants. They're going to fight off the oxidized, more harmful LDLs. Also, our thyroid and our stress levels can influence our heart health. Then also our emotional state, our levels of anxiety and stress can influence our food choices, right? So if we are constantly busy and not taking care of ourselves and taking time to sit down and eat 3 meals a day, we're more likely to be getting those fast food meals, to be skimping on the proteins, the good quality foods, and then even our spiritual health. So I think that the health of our nervous system, if we are lacking in cholesterol, or we are constantly spiking those stress hormones, it's harder to be in that present spiritual state that I think is very important to have in a regular basis. So lots of great connections there. Also, just the stress of feeling like you're at risk of a chronic disease, that's going to influence things. So I want to just end here with a couple of interesting studies. So this one was looking at a group of 72 people ages above 50 who had hypertension. And they implemented, there was 2 groups. One group was doing this diet called the MIND diet, which was a combination of Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So both of those are really based on having plenty of plant-based foods, low sugar, low processed foods, a moderate amount of animal-based foods. So there was one group doing that. The other group was doing that same diet, but also daily forest bathing. So that is really just going out like on the forest, into the forest, going on a nice calming walk, a hike, and calming your nervous system. And so they found that both groups, it was only for 4 weeks. So that's a pretty short study. But it's difficult to do longer studies with nutrition because we have to track what everyone's eating and make sure it's following the rules and everything. So 4 weeks, they found both groups had decreased blood pressure. The group that was also doing forest bathing had even had a lower level of anxiety score, which I'm assuming they did with like a questionnaire. But both groups decreased their blood pressure, which we know is really connected to heart, cholesterol, all these things. Remember those 5 metabolic markers at the beginning, those are all interconnected. So really, really cool results there. Definitely a reason to not forget about the mindfulness interventions. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Here's my email and a couple of QR codes where you can reach out to me and schedule a call or grab my meal planning freebie and join my email list. Thanks for listening.